Before the cities understood what was coming, they heard hooves. Not the heavy thunder of armored knights. Not the slow grinding march of infantry under banners. It was lighter than that, faster, broken by distance and wind, a rhythm moving across the grass like weather. Then came the arrows. They did not arrive as a single heroic shot. They came in clouds. They came from riders who seemed to be fleeing, then turning, then vanishing, then appearing again where no army should have been. Men trained to hold walls, guard roads, and meet enemies in ordered battle found themselves fighting a force that refused to stand still long enough to be understood. The Mongol horse archer did not look like the end of empires at first glance. He carried no marble ideology, no sacred wall, no shining cathedral of power. He carried a bow made from horn, sinew, wood, and patience. He carried spare horses. He carried dried meat, a knife, a lasso, a file, a water skin, and a lifetime of motion. He was not a soldier who had learned to ride. He was a rider who had learned to make war. Across the 13th century, that difference broke kingdoms. For settled empires, war had weight. It had supply columns, fortified towns, bridges, siege trains, taxes, harvests, roads, and official command stamped by men who believed the world could be held in place. Power lived in cities and capitals. It looked permanent because stone looks permanent. A wall told the mind that order had a boundary. A gate told merchants where the state began. A tower told soldiers where courage should stand. On the steppe, power looked different. It moved. The Eurasian grasslands were not empty. They were a hard school. Cold, hunger, distance, and competition trained human beings to read horizons, weather, animals, and danger with a precision that city dwellers rarely needed. A boy on the steppe learned the horse before he understood politics. He learned balance before command. He learned that survival depended on speed, endurance, memory, and discipline disguised as freedom. The bow completed that world. The composite bow of the steppe was compact enough to use from horseback, yet powerful enough to kill at distances that unnerved enemies. It was not merely a weapon. It was a relationship between craft and body. Horn resisted compression. Sinew resisted tension. Wood held the form. The archer's hands, shoulders, and breath turned that stored force into movement. In the right hands, it allowed a mounted man to strike while advancing, withdrawing, circling, or pretending to break. For centuries before the Mongol explosion, nomad horse archers had challenged settled states. The Huns, Turks, Magyars, Khitans, and other peoples had shown what mobility could do. China built defenses and diplomacy around the problem. Persia, Byzantium, and the Islamic world learned to fear riders who would not fight by the rules of heavy infantry. Nothing about the horse archer was entirely new. What changed under Chinggis Khan was scale, organization, and obedience. The Mongols did not become terrifying because they were wild. They became terrifying because they were disciplined. Chinggis Khan forged tribes into a military machine that could move with the fluidity of the steppe and the coherence of a state. Units were organized by tens, hundreds, thousands, and 10,000s. Commanders were promoted for ability as well as loyalty. Signals, scouts, messengers, and strict laws turned movement into command. Every warrior was expected to bring multiple horses. That detail mattered more than any single heroic charge. A man with one horse moves until the animal tires. A man with several horses becomes a different kind of problem. He can ride farther, change mounts, preserve strength, and appear where slower armies believed he could not arrive. The Mongol army did not simply travel across distance. It consumed distance. Behind the famous arrows was logistics without the usual baggage. Mongol warriors could live on herds, dried food, and the animals they rode. They did not need the same roads. They did not always need the same depots. They could divide, spread, scout, and reassemble with a speed that made enemy information expire almost as soon as it was gathered. A city might receive news that the Mongols were far away. By the time the council argued over what that meant, the riders could be much closer. The old order struggled because it expected war to reveal itself in familiar shapes. A large army should need a large road. A siege should come after a formal approach. A retreat should mean weakness. A scattered enemy should be vulnerable. The Mongols turned those assumptions into traps. The feigned retreat became one of their most feared instruments. It was not cowardice. It was theater performed with deadly discipline. A Mongol unit would attack, shower arrows, provoke anger, then pull away as if broken. Enemy cavalry, noble warriors, or confident infantry would pursue, tasting victory before it existed. The pursuit stretched their formation. It separated the impatient from the cautious. Then the fleeing riders turned, or other Mongol units closed from the sides, and the hunters became the hunted. Few things are more dangerous in war than believing the enemy is running because he is afraid. For armies built around honor, shock, and visible courage, this was psychologically corrosive. The Mongols did not always offer the satisfying moment of contact. They attacked nerves as much as bodies. A soldier could stand bravely and still be useless if the enemy killed from beyond reach. A commander could order a charge and watch the target dissolve into dust. A prince could assemble armored men whose equipment had won prestige for generations, only to see them exhausted, separated, and surrounded before the decisive blow. When the Mongols moved west into the Khwarezmian Empire, they faced a realm of cities, wealth, soldiers, and Islamic prestige. Khwarezm did not lack walls. It did not lack numbers. It did not lack arrogance. Shah Muhammad II misjudged the storm gathering beyond his frontier, and when war came, Mongol mobility and coordination turned the empire's size against it. Cities stood apart like islands. Commanders hesitated. Messages lagged behind events. The Mongols chose where to concentrate and where to bypass, where to terrify and where to negotiate, where to punish and where to recruit. The horse archer alone did not take every city. Siege engineers, captured specialists, Chinese technology, Persian administrators, and brutal political calculation all became part of the Mongol method. That is essential to understand. The Mongols were not only riders with bows. They were learners. They absorbed tools from enemies, then used them against the next wall. Mobility opened the door. Adaptation widened it. Still, the heart of the shock remained the mounted archer. He shaped the campaign before the siege began. He cut communications. He destroyed field armies. He drove refugees toward cities and fear into councils. He made the countryside unsafe. He forced rulers to make decisions under pressure, often with bad information and worse imagination. Imagine a frontier commander at dawn. His scouts return with contradictory reports. One says the Mongols are retreating. Another says they have crossed a river thought impossible at that season. A third says smoke is rising behind the town, not in front of it. The commander has walls, men, grain, and orders. What he does not have is certainty. Against the Mongols, uncertainty itself became a weapon. At battles such as Kalka River in 1223, Eastern European princes and their allies learned the same lesson. Mongol forces under Subutai and Jebe had ridden across enormous distances, gathering information and testing the political world ahead of them. Their enemies saw a raiding force and believed they could crush it. Instead, they were drawn into pursuit, stretched over terrain, and broken by coordination they did not understand until too late. The Mongols did not need every warrior to be individually invincible. They needed the army to behave like a single hunting intelligence. Scouts watched. Commanders calculated. Units withdrew, turned, encircled, and struck. Arrows weakened the body. Movement weakened judgment. Fear weakened the chain of command. By the time the close kill came, the enemy had often been defeated in rhythm before he was defeated in flesh. The sound of Mongol warfare was not only the whistle of arrows. It was the silence after a false retreat, the sudden drum of hooves from a flank, the shouts in a language defenders did not know, the creak of saddle leather, the dry scrape of bowstrings, the panic of horses smelling blood and dust. It was the sound of an army refusing to become a target. In Europe, the shock deepened because many elites trusted heavy cavalry as the visible expression of military power. Armor, lineage, and shock action carried cultural meaning. A knightly charge was more than a tactic. It was a statement about class, courage, and the right to rule. The Mongol answer was brutally unsentimental. Pride could be baited. Armor could be bypassed, exhausted, or shot at the horse. A formation built to break a line could suffer against an enemy that offered no stable line until the moment of encirclement. At Mohi in 1241, the Kingdom of Hungary faced a Mongol army that used reconnaissance, river crossings, missiles, and coordinated pressure to dismantle resistance. The Mongols did not simply rush from the east like a mindless wave. They probed, trapped, maneuvered, and struck. They used engineers and tactical deception. They understood that terror after victory traveled faster than any rider. Survivors carried the message ahead of them. That message was part of the weapon. Cities surrendered because other cities had been destroyed. Rulers paid because refusal had examples. The Mongol reputation moved before the army and sometimes did the work of an army. Yet reputation would have meant little without repeated performance. The fear was credible because the system kept proving itself. There is a temptation to imagine the horse archer as pure freedom, a romantic figure moving beneath an endless sky. The reality was harsher and more impressive. Mongol mobility depended on discipline that could survive fatigue, hunger, cold, and temptation. A warrior in a feigned retreat had to keep riding when instinct might want him to turn too soon. A unit had to obey signals while dust and distance made the battlefield hard to read. A campaign had to coordinate columns separated by landscapes that would have shattered less organized forces. This is why empires were shocked. They were not merely beaten by speed. They were beaten by speed with memory. Speed with command. Speed with logistics. Speed with political ruthlessness. Speed that could learn. The Mongol horse archer also changed the moral atmosphere of war. He made the battlefield feel unstable. He made distance feel unsafe. He made retreat suspect and pursuit dangerous. He made commanders doubt their eyes. When a military system can force its enemy to mistrust the most basic signs of battle, it has reached into the mind. But the Mongol triumph was never only destruction. The same networks that carried armies later carried envoys, merchants, craftsmen, maps, diseases, ideas, and fear. The empire built by riders tied distant worlds together with violence first, and administration afterward. The horse archer opened roads that others would travel for trade, diplomacy, and conquest. History rarely separates creation from ruin as neatly as we wish. Eventually, the conditions that favored Mongol expansion changed. Forests, tropical heat, maritime barriers, political fragmentation, succession struggles, and the demands of ruling settled populations all complicated the old speed. Gunpowder, fortified states, and new military systems would later alter the balance again. No weapon dominates forever. Every advantage invites adaptation. Yet the shock of the Mongol horse archer remains one of the clearest examples of how a way of life can become a military revolution. The weapon was not just the bow. It was the childhood on horseback, the spare mounts, the command structure, the scouts, the punishments, the rewards, the willingness to deceive, the patience to ride for days, and the cold intelligence to turn an enemy's confidence into weakness. When settled rulers looked at the steppe, many saw emptiness. They saw distance between real places. The Mongols saw a road. That difference reshaped continents. In the end, the horse archer shocked empires because he exposed the arrogance of permanence. Walls were powerful, but they could be isolated. Heavy cavalry was powerful, but it could be baited. Large armies were powerful, but they could be blinded. Capitals were powerful, but they depended on messages, roads, grain, and belief. The Mongols attacked all of it. The rider on the horizon was not just a man with a bow. He was a warning that power does not always arrive in the form a civilization respects. Sometimes it comes from the place dismissed as empty. Sometimes it moves too fast for the language of old commanders. Sometimes it retreats, and the retreat is the trap. The lesson reached beyond the 13th century. It remained wherever armies learned that range, speed, intelligence, and discipline could defeat heavier symbols of strength. The Mongols did not invent mobility, but they revealed its full political terror. They showed that a battlefield could begin long before swords crossed, in the mind of a ruler who no longer knew where the enemy truly was. By the time many empires understood that lesson, the hoofbeats were already behind them.